So the first model we're going to look at is something called the theory of reasoned action, and then that'll lead us to a conversation of the theory of planned behavior, which actually came out of the theory of reasoned action. So this model had its starts in the late 60s, and it was originally developed as a way to predict consumer behavior. So it wasn't even really about health promotion, it was really more about like why people buy things. And it really focused on kind of an A to B relationship. So A being attitudes and B being behaviors. So our attitudes determined our behaviors. So our attitude really is to a particular behavior is also linked to the outcome we expect from engaging in that particular behavior. So for instance, if the behavior is physical activity, well, my attitude to it is linked to what I actually expect to get out of that. So if I'm active, what am I going to get out of being active? Is it just that I'm going to lose weight? But I don't lose weight right away. So why would I want to be active, right? It's tiring, it's costly. So these are some of the attitudes that might negatively affect someone's behavioral intention, which is kind of the main part of this theory, which ultimately affects their participation in a particular behavior. Okay. And so it's not just, so attitudes was kind of the main component of their belief about what leads to behavior change. And the attitude for a particular behavior would be contingent on their beliefs about that particular behavior. So getting back to the physical activity example, it could be like, well, it costs time, I get sweaty, I don't like it. That's kind of a negative attitude. Alternatively, the attitude could be like, I actually enjoy it, it's social, and I feel really fresh and rejuvenated after exercise. So those are kind of different attitudes that probably different people would have. And you could probably guess that the person with that second set of attitudes is more likely to actually engage in that behavior, okay? So it's not just about like what they feel about the behavior, but also that outcome expectation too. Will I actually feel fresh? Will I actually feel better after the exercise? Will I actually lose weight? I hate losing weight as a motivator of behavior change, but nonetheless, I know that it works for some people. But if they don't think that that outcome that they crave is actually going to be a result of participating in the behavior, then they're not going to do it, right? If someone's like, for instance, they've worked out so many times and it just never works for them, right? They're really obsessed about losing weight, and whenever they've worked out, they've only lost like a pound, right? They're like, then why would I bother? Okay, so these again are all areas that we would work with our person or our population to understand the attitudes that are affecting their desire to, their intention to participate in a particular behavior. But also worth mentioning, another part that was added to this theory was this concept of subjective norm. So subjective norm is like, how acceptable is that particular behavior in my personal belief, right? What are the norms around that behavior? So for instance, is exercise a normative behavior, acceptable in our society? Yeah, it's quite acceptable in our society. Now, do I care though? That's also goes into the subjective norm. I know that everyone thinks I should exercise and that it's like good, but like, do I actually care that other people want me to exercise? There's that push and the pull in that area. Another good example here is, let's say, like veganism. So let's say we're looking at the behavioral intention and the behavior to eat just an entirely plant-based diet. 20 years ago, that wasn't normative. That wasn't part of like just like a normal thing that you see all the time. So 20 years ago, it would have been a lot less kind of easy to become a vegan, given as far as like how you would integrate into society as a vegan, right? So right now, plant-based veganism, that's very popular. I'm not vegan myself. Like, I know it's a normative belief, but I don't have a motivation to comply in that. Not to saying it's right or wrong, but it's just, I'm trying to give you an idea of how these things work to ultimately get into the behavioral intention and eventually into the behavior as well. Okay, so just a little bit more on this concept of attitudes and subjective norms, because they come up a lot in behavior change theory and they're really key. Okay, so attitudes are just like, how do you view that particular behavior? What are your pros and your cons? And this again goes back into like the values of our population and what they think is worth doing and what they think is not worth doing. So especially if we're working one-on-one, that's a good place to start with people, is like, what are your attitudes around physical activity? Do you hate it? Do you like, why do you hate it? Right? What kind of past experiences have you had with it that have influenced your current attitudes? And how can we tweak these things? How can we reframe your attitudes so you're more likely to, let's say, make this a part of your life? What's interesting, research has shown that the cons might be more relevant to those unmotivated to change. Like the cons of the behavior, so the cons to exercising, for instance, might keep them locked in to not exercising. And so if we can, again, reframe those cons, and make them think differently about it, that might, again, help them with their own motivation to change. Okay. While people that are already engaged in a particular behavior, really emphasizing those pros, for instance, like we can really emphasize like how good they might feel. Like, don't you feel good after that workout? Or, my goodness, your face is glowing after exercising. Or look how much more exercise capacity you have, aerobic capacity, muscular capacity you have. Those pros can help perhaps motivate people that are already like interested in changing that behavior or keeping to change that behavior. Okay. Also, it's important to note that emotions have a really strong effect on like keeping people stuck in their current behaviors. So for instance, emotional cons, and the one that comes to mind is, let's say someone has obesity and they think about going to the gym, and they have a thought that when they go to the gym, everyone's going to be judging at them and staring at them, and they're really worried about the judgments and opinions of others. And they are like, I remember when I was obese, like I remember that anxiety that could trigger, that can be really, really powerful in like limiting people from making the changes that would actually make a difference in their lives. So these are all things we need to keep in mind when we are working with people. Okay. So another major concept is this concept of norms. A norm, to define that term, is a pattern or trait taken to be typical in the behavior of a social group. Okay, so we observe them. So for instance, the most obvious one that's really topical right now, is that I remember when I first started teaching at SFU and at FIC, the Fraser International College in particular, I would notice at the International College that a lot of my students, in particular the students from China and Hong Kong, when they were sick, they would wear a mask. And I was always like, I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, that's odd. I was like, why are you wearing a mask? It was so odd to me, and now like they knew it was up before, or they normalized that behavior before it just became normalized, right? And now, you go to certain places and you're not wearing a mask, and you feel like some people might feel that they are not behaving in a normative way. So other examples of norms, this is a good one, wearing a tie or not to work, right? I remember my husband, when he started a new job, he's got a law degree, and like his old law firm, he would always wear a tie and everyone like dressed up. And then he started working like at an engineering company, and he showed up in a suit and tie, and everyone's like, why are you wearing a suit and tie? Like there's kind of an understanding of what you should say and do or dress or whatever in a particular environment. That's an example of a norm. Okay. Another one of my favorite examples of a norm is this one, standing on one side, the right side of an escalator if you're standing, and walking on the left. No one ever told me that. No one ever told me you're supposed to, if you're walking up the escalator, you walk on the left. If you're standing, you stand on the right. How do I know that that's the right thing to do? Why? Because I observed other people. That's what they were doing. I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's what I should do, right? And in Vancouver, you'll actually notice that if you are standing on the left side and some people's trying to walk up, they'll kind of be jerks. They're like, don't you know you're supposed to be standing on the right? Well, no one told me, but it's a norm that people get to like start to believe is the way you should act. But these things do, like I said, change over time. Okay, and there's no saying that we have to do what everyone else does too. That's important to mention here. Okay, so here's a few examples, but like the one I keep kind of getting back to is that right now, like obsessive hand washing and social distancing and these kind of things, they've become more normal than they were even a year ago. It's amazing how quickly things have changed. And that's an important note here, is that, you know, we can change norms. So for instance, drinking and driving used to be socially acceptable. It still is in some areas. Now it's completely unacceptable. That took time to change, okay? But this can be part of our efforts, is to change the norms too. If we're working on an individual basis, like with a one-on-one situation, that's something we might want to do with our clients, is examine, you know, what are your norms around this behavior, and how can we shift your perception of that norm, because it's a subjective norm. It's like what you think is normal. Okay, and how do we shift that subjective norm so we normalize that new behavior, that new attitude as well? Okay, so again, this is that concept of subjective norm, how we perceive what others think and what they define as normal or acceptable. Okay, and again, what's interesting about this is just because we see something as a norm out there doesn't mean that we think that we should participate in it. And again, mask wearing is a great example here, right? Wearing a mask is like a social norm right now, but subjectively, some people might be like, that's not actually what I want to participate in at all. You know, there's still choice in this as well. And you can think that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm just using that as an example, okay? So the perceived social pressure to perform or not perform the behavior. And again, with mask wearing, as I keep coming back to, is there a social pressure, and do I care about that social pressure? These are things that I know, again, we want to examine with the people we work with to understand what's influencing their behavior. Okay, so the theory of reasoned action, that was kind of the original theory, but the main argument against it was that it didn't really speak to this concept of a person's belief in their ability to actually change. Okay, it's talked about the attitudes towards change. Does it fit into like the social fabric that they want to be a part of? But it didn't really examine, like, does a person actually think they can change? You know, so again, with physical activity, if you've had a negative relationship with physical activity your whole life, you might think that, well, that's for other people. That's just not for me. You know, like that's not something I'm good at. You know, I've tried before and I just can't do it, right? The theory of reasoned action did not really speak to that concept of, more than anything, this is a concept of self-efficacy and controllability. Okay, so we're going to explore this concept of self-efficacy specifically a little bit more. Okay, so the theory of planned behavior still talks about behavioral intention and how that leads to behavior, but in addition to the attitudes and the subjective norms and the things that affect those, which we saw in the TRA slide, there is this perceived behavior control. And you'll notice that there's these arrows between these things as well. And a good example here is that, like, if I have good perceived behavior control, if I'm like, yeah, I can exercise, of course I can exercise, right? My attitude about exercise might be more positive, right? Whereas if I'm like, no, I'm not very good at it. I kind of suck. I don't know what to do. I don't have body control, you know, that can affect your attitude about it. So I love this concept of self-efficacy. It's one that comes up in a lot of my classes. So self-efficacy is important to mention that it's goal specific or situation specific. It is not self-esteem. Okay. However, self-efficacy can affect self-esteem. So self-efficacy is my belief in my capacity to actually perform a specific action. So my belief in my capacity to change. Do I think that I'm actually able to exercise regularly? Do I think I'm actually able to regularly consume more fruits and vegetables? Okay. Self-esteem is like your general sense of yourself and how good or maybe not so good you feel about yourself. Okay. And of course, if you feel like you can do whatever, like everything you put your mind to, you can do, you have high self-efficacy, you know, that can of course positively affect self-esteem. And the opposite is also true. Okay. So self-efficacy is affected by a lot of things. It's often affected by your like previous experiences with something. It also affects is whether it's like, can I do this right now, or is it going to take years? Right? So your self-efficacy to, let's say, finish med school, that's more of a long-term goal. right? Where an immediate goal of like passing BPK 340 is probably higher than actually finishing med school, okay? So it depends how like proximal or distal that goal is. Self-efficacy can also be affected by feedback. So for instance, if you set a goal and you're like, I can do this, and then you get closer to the goal and you're like, oh, hey, I'm actually doing these things. I'm getting there, right? And there's positive feedback. It might help you get all the way to that goal. Okay, and the alternative is true as well. If you have high self-efficacy about something and you're starting to do it, and you're like, I can do it, and everyone's like, what are you even doing? You're not very good at that. This feedback, whether internal or external, or as far as changes are going in your body, this can affect your self-efficacy too. Something that can affect self-efficacy is also like how close you actually get to your goal, right? If you get close to your goal, that's something that can build that self-efficacy in the moment. So for instance, if I get close to my goal, I'm like, hey, I did this and I can keep going and I can do that next goal as well. However, if I had this goal and I get here instead of here, I might think, well, no, see, I can't do it. I told you I can't do it. And as a health promoter, and I added this into this slide, we can reframe this. Be like, okay, you didn't get to your goal, but was that goal maybe unrealistic? Or did things happen along the way that made that goal more unattainable? Right? Do we have to persevere? For instance, if it's weight loss is the goal, perseverance, commitment is one of the most important things to that one. So we might have to reframe like, no, this is part of the process. It takes time. Okay. So in every case, like I keep saying, is going to be a little bit different. Okay. Other things that can improve self-efficacy is mastery experiences. So I think of like say working with a personal trainer. Okay. Someone maybe, let's say, can't deadlift 100 pounds yet, okay? But they started at 20 pounds, 30 pounds, let's say they started at 30 pounds, being able to deadlift 30 pounds, and then they were able to go up to 35 pounds. And you're just like, I can't believe you did that. Congratulations, look at you. You just mastered that. You were at 30 and now you're at 35. That's amazing. Another way to do this is like breaking things up into smaller goals. I remember I was doing a hike with some students and I had one student that had a really hard time getting up Cardiac Hill, which you guys know. And I saw it on her face and her self-esteem was so low. Her self-efficacy was low in that moment. And so we're like, okay, well, let's break this up. Instead of let's focusing on getting to the top, let's get to that tree. See that tree right there? Let's get to that tree. Okay, and she's like, okay. So we get to that tree and it's like, yeah, mastery experience. Congrats, you got to this tree. Okay, let's take a break. Okay, you tell me when you're ready again. Okay, now, and then, this was good actually. I was proud of myself in the moment. I was like, okay, what do you want to set as your next goal? Right? Which tree or what do you want to set? You know, and then she started taking the power back as well. Okay. Social persuasion can also help in that same example. It was really beautiful. All her friends were around and they're like, you can do this, you know, like you got this. Sometimes it can go the wrong way, social persuasion, if it's like too hard and it pushes you beyond your actual capacity, but it can be helpful. We can model it. We can be like, look, she just did that, you know, like sometimes we look at like what other people are able to do and like, they can do that, I can do that. Right? So modeling that of someone that's close to them in capacity, like let's say it's like to show them that it's actually possible if they themselves think that it's not. Okay. And maybe if there's something more physiological that's altering their just capacity or their clarity of their mind or something like that, we can also perhaps focus on those things first. Right? So if stress, fatigue, these are all affecting self-efficacy, maybe we really need to start with like, actually before you start really committing to an exercise program, we need to maybe look at reorganizing your life. Let's talk, what aspects of your life do you think that we can reorganize so you feel that you have enough time and energy to accomplish this goal, which we all know that you can accomplish. Okay? So there's a lot of psychology to this stuff. And this brings us to another critical concept in health promotion, which is the concept of locus of control. And an internal versus an external locus of control, which is very important with behavior change. So someone with an internal locus of control, they think that motivation comes from within. They think, I am able to do this. I can determine my future. I make things happen. Look what I can do. They're just like, I got this. That's an internal locus of control. Okay. An external locus of control is someone that feels like life happens to them. Okay, and there's no judgment with this because we're all exactly where we need to be right now. Okay, but some people think that, why do things keep happening to me? Right? There's nothing I can do about my future. I just suck at physical activity. That's the way I was born. Right? That's what my genetics say. Right? If there's that external locus of control, sometimes this can breed a bit of a victim mentality, which really negatively affects their ability to do things because they're stuck in the I don't influence my own behavior mentality, right? So this is again why we need to get to know the people we're working with and to figure out what's limiting them. And again, if someone has a very external locus of control, we can start bit by bit through mastery experiences, through modeling, through reevaluation of their past and times where they were able to, let's say, control their behavior. It depends on the person, but these things can be really effective at helping people to reframe their way of looking at life for them to realize that they are fully in control. And things might be easier for some people than others, but we are ultimately the captains of our ship. Something that has been suggested to be added to this concept of the theory of planned behavior is implementation intentions, which basically says that, okay, someone has a behavioral intention, sure, but can we just really solidify that intention a little bit more? Can we make that intention happen by having an implementation intention as well? What's an implementation intention? Specific plans about when, where, how, and with whom a behavior will take place. For instance, an implementation intention is for me this morning, being okay, I got to call the tennis court and I'm going to book a court for 6 p.m. I want to play tennis today. So I am not only setting an intention to play tennis today, I'm doing an implementation intention by booking a court and making a plan with my husband to do that, right? And I'm more likely to do it if I have this implementation intention, okay? It forces people to prioritize their goal and to come up with a specific plan of action. And again, if you're working one-on-one, I firmly suggest using these with your clients, right? So how, or when, or with whom, let's set up a plan, or do you want to make a plan? Let's put it in writing. Do you want this kind of accountability to it? Speaks to that as well. Plus, it gives people flexibility in planning their lives as well. For instance, me calling a tennis court and saying 6 p.m., that works with my schedule, and I get to decide when I'm actually going to do it. So another example of an implementation intention is putting your gym shoes and your gym clothes in your school bag when you go to school as that extra motivation to actually go to the gym. So you're I know I've done that before. Well, I brought them. I guess I should go to the gym, right? Or, I used to do Orange Theory, and an implementation intention with Orange Theory is so you have to sign up. So when I sign up, it's well, I signed up, I should go. And especially with something like this, is if you sign up and you don't go, you get charged whatever, $15. So that's a really strong implementation intention because if you don't do it, you actually get kind of penalized. So the last little thing I want to add into this discussion of the theory of reasoned action and the theory of planned behavior is that in 1998, De Vries just tweaked the model a little bit. It's still kind of talking about how the attitudes, the social norms and self-efficacy, they play into behavior intention, but they also argued that the intention is not enough. And an intention is great, but we also, when we add the knowledge and skills and reduce barriers to the behavior and increase support to the behavior, it's more likely to happen as well. Okay, so that is one of our main models, or a few main models of behavior change, and we'll see more in the next module.